live, maybe we're not. So if we are live, I am here with Chris. And do you want to talk a little bit about what it is that you do here at Rasa? Well, oop, nope, nope. Double check everything and make sure that it's actually working. Excellent connection. That's what I love to hear.
Yeah, so hey everyone, my name is Chris Desmarais, and I'm a solutions engineer at Rasa, helping out all of our subscription customers. So basically, anytime one of our clients becomes an enterprise client, they have a solutions engineer that will help them out, like any questions they have, and basically just helping them build out their bot.
Yeah. Um, and I always love talking to the solutions engineers because usually when I'm talking to developers, they're working at like sort of, you know, smaller or medium scale, and you get to work on like big problems, right? The large scale problems. Great. All right. So while we're waiting for some questions in the chat. So if you're just joining us, please feel free to ask any questions in the chat and we will do our best to answer them about Rasa open source or Rasa X, or if you just have questions about AI or NLP in general, we might be able to help out. I would love to hear, to the degree that you can share, are there any projects that you've worked on recently that you're really excited about? Of course, respecting that we can't always say everything that we're working on, unfortunately.
Yeah, I I've been working on a voice project lately,
Mm.
and it's been definitely has some of the newer challenges of dealing with like transcript issues.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can build your bot perfectly and you can test it with Rasa test, and all of your tests go over text, and then someone will come in and try something and it just gets the transcript wrong and your intent comes back completely wrong because of that.
Mm.
So it's had a lot of unique challenges, but it's really fun to be able to just like call a number and talk to it versus texting it or anything like that. I think it's one of the more unique channels.
Yeah, definitely. There's always a lot of I don't know. I think it's regular. Also, I see Amina says hi. Hello, Amina. Well, it's so good to see you again. Amina's one of our regulars on YouTube. It's great to be back. Oh, Amina's got a bunch of questions. Let's absolutely answer those. But in the meantime, I think it's really common for folks who haven't worked with voice data to assume that, hey, I'll just take my text models and then transcribe speech and it'll be exactly the same and it'll work, easy peasy. And I do understand that that is the promise of the future, but unfortunately it is not the reality of the present. Uh, and yeah, there's a lot of challenges
Yeah.
with voice specifically. Yeah. But I mean, there's the accessibility issue, right? Because you don't have to, you could use it while you were driving, or if you weren't literate, you could use it. So lots of additional utility there.
Yeah, and when you do get it right, at least personally, I find the experience a lot more satisfying and helpful than
Mm.
like the traditional press one for billing kind of thing. So
Yeah. Yeah, and not having to like memorize keywords, and you can just say things in your own voice, assuming it gets recognized correctly.
right, yeah, that's the key is if it works. But
If it
but when it
works.
does, yeah, it can be really good.
All right, we're still waiting on those questions. I'm guessing it's going to take a while to type. So in the meantime, question for you that I love to ask people, and I think I've asked you this before. Oh wait, it's already come in. I'll stick that in my back pocket for later. Okay, I have a scenario. This is from Amina, in which the flow of a conversation will change based on the entity value. So there is a lot of levels, and every time I need to ask a specific follow-up question based on the answer. How can I handle this situation, according to you? What I've done so far is multiple forms and multiple stories. So there's a conversation, an entity is extracted. Depending on the entity, the conversation itself will change. What should she do?
Yeah, great question. The typical thing is to basically have a slot that autofills based off of that entity, and then you're branching based off of a featureized slot, which is basically when you set influence conversation to true for that slot, it allows you to build branches inside of your stories. So that's kind of like the typical path that will build when that is the case.
Mhm.
But I will say if it's like sometimes people are branching just because they want a different like they need a different response and the flow of the conversation is the same.
Hmm.
And in that case, we actually just have we have this feature that's been experimental, but is now generally available called conditional response variation.
Mm-hmm.
That can be super helpful if your conversation is not again if it's following the same path, it's just the responses that are changing
Mm-hmm.
based off of that slot. And what you can do in this feature is basically define out the different responses in your domain and then just have a single story that points at that response. And then your response will basically pick which way it needs to go based off of the slot.
We've got a little code example here in case you wanted to see what that looked like. I know I'm real zoomed in, but in this example, if there is a name slot that is true, sorry, no, if the logged in slot is set to true, then the information from the name slot will be used in this response, and if it's not, then it won't. Um, so yeah, I think it might still be marked as experimental for the moment, but it should be pretty stable. So I would not hesitate to recommend using it.
Yeah, it was actually I think 288. I think the
Was it in
release that
288?
just went out
Oh, okay.
that just came out. It was March 8th. Oh, wait, you know what? We don't even have the release notes out for it yet. But yeah, that is there. But yeah, also in this example, you can see that logged in is now no longer a featureized slot. So influence conversation is set to false because you no longer need it to branch inside your stories. You're just using it for that response there. So that can make things, tidy up your stories and so on, make it easier. But again, this is only applies if like the flow of whether they're logged in or not is the same.
And my intuition is that that would also reduce training times, but I don't actually have good empirical evidence that that is the case.
I would guess the same, but yeah, I also don't have evidence.
If anyone wants to do an experiment with that, I think that would be a great blog post. Amina says, I have categorical values, so it's specific.
Yeah, I think even with the categorical slot, like both still should apply. If the difference value of the categorical slot changes the flow, then you'll just have to branch based off of a slot that's being set. But even with you can still reuse CRV or conditional response variation when the slot is categorical.
Yeah. And I would also say if you have the flow will change, it's not the same. Amina's clarifying.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so CRV doesn't apply. But yeah, it's the standard way is like you're doing fill that entity into a slot and then branch the story based off of the presence of it.
Yeah. Hopefully that answers your question. Yeah, I don't think you need forms in this particular instance unless you're doing like a lot of validation of the slots as part of the workflow, in which case, a form might be an easier way to do that. But yeah, I think influence conversation set to true should help. And if there's something where like maybe one of the turns is you check somebody's age, and if they're a minor, you don't, offer to sell them alcohol through the spot. And if it's like you absolutely always want it to work a specific way, then I might add a rule for that specific slot. All right, we've got a new question, and it looks like Amina has a follow up. Actually, I'm going to do Amina's follow up, and then we'll do the new questions. Hi, Faiza. Where were you? I was just working on other stuff. Unfortunately, I had a lot on my plate, but one of the things I was working on was the developer certification, all new, relaunched, free to take. So if you are interested in becoming certified, please do. What do you mean by branch? Do you have an example, please? Do we have a good example in the docs of that story structure?
Maybe under conversation.
patterns. Here, I'm gonna pop open the browser so I can see what I'm looking at. That's forms. Textual conversations, maybe? Slot stories.
And maybe something in slots.
Yeah, so here we have this slot was set example to show you how that would work, right? So up to here, it's all the same. And then here, if the person likes music, then they get the liking music response. And if they don't like music, then the bot says goodbye, which is a little rude maybe. But yeah, so this is sort of how it would look.
And actually in this exact case, this is where I would now turn this into a CRV because it's GA. Because again, the flow of it is the same. So you can just have a single like utter music response. And then inside your domain, you set this logic for the specific response to give based off of if they like music or not.
But if this wasn't just one utterance here that's influenced by the slot, you could continue to have like the rest of the conversation flow that you'd want to see.
I lost your audio, Rachel.
Oh no, you're frozen for me. One sec.
I don't know if that's just me or not.
I can hear you. You can't hear me. Can you hear me now?
Oh, now I can hear you.
I'm back? Okay, fabulous. That was exciting in a bad way. Okay, I think it's good. Finds wants to know, do I do any live coding anymore? I'm going to do a mix of live coding and like sort of informal talks. So those will be on Friday, a little bit later in the day though. So 1 p.m. Pacific time. All right, so now we have a big set of questions from Comsvergable? Sorry if I'm saying that wrong. That looks like German to me. Do you have any tips on how to speed up the workflow when developing stories and dialogues? I have the problem that if I try out my stories are working, I have to retrain my model. So my workflow is writing the story, building the model, deploying the model locally, and checking if it works. For a smaller prototype, this takes around 5 to 6 minutes on my local machine and makes development really slow for every dev iteration. How do I work with Rasa? So how do you speed up the development workflow of retraining your assistant? Yeah. 5 to 6 minutes training locally. That is pretty slow.
If you're just changing stories, hopefully it's recognizing that the NLU model didn't change too. So that'd be one thing to look into is it fully retraining the model every time you retrain it, or is it just retraining the core model? That would probably be the first thing that I would check. Otherwise, I'm assuming you have like a decent amount of data in there, and that's probably why it's taking so long.
I know we added fine tuning.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if that just applied to NLU or not.
That was the question I was about to ask you. All right, really quick. So fine tuning is instead of retraining the model from scratch every time, you checkpoint at the most recent version of the model and you add more data and continue to train the existing model. And what neither of us knows off the top of our head is whether or not the fine tuning applies to just intents or also the conversation flow. Sorry, what was that?
I think it's called incremental training.
Incremental training. Okay. There we go. Diet classifier, response selector.
If you search again, I think this is from the migration guide. At the bottom, I'm assuming there'll be more there. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Specific models. The TED policy. So I think it should work for I think it should work for your conversation flows as well. So if you're not using fine tuning, I would use fine tuning. And you can do that when you train by adding this dash dash fine tune flag. If you are adding a bunch of conversations at once, particularly if those conversations are very unlike previous conversations, I cannot guarantee that this will decrease total training time. But hopefully in most situations it will. Yeah. Hopefully that answers your question. Yeah. Also, if it's a relatively simple assistant, perhaps you might try reducing the number of intents. That can sometimes help to, and thus the number of conversations, and that can help to reduce training time because it's just like a less complex problem computationally.
Also be worth checking out your config. Like if you have 300 epochs, for example,
yes,
set for anything, most likely you don't need that many for a simple project. So actually when you do train a model, you should see on the right, like what the accuracy is, and you'll see it start to converge like towards 1. And you'll be able to see at a certain number of epochs, like, okay, after 70 epochs, for example, you may not be getting any accuracy boost from it. So you can just cut it off at that.
Yeah. And if you can also reduce the number of epochs and have fine tuning on, so then you just start from the last epoch if you wanted to do like 10 at a time or something. 10 might be a little low. Yeah. Hopefully that helps. They can hear us? Fantastic. It was yesterday I was giving a talk and I lost internet completely 15 minutes before I was supposed to go live, and it was harrowing, but thankfully it has not happened today. Vincenzo says, do we have any platform where we can follow you as a mentor, please? Ooh. I'm not really taking new mentees right now. I'm at capacity. I don't know, are you open to mentees, Chris?
Yeah, if you reach out to me on LinkedIn, I think we could figure something out.
Also, if you just are curious about specific questions for you have Rasa questions specifically, we have a forum. Right? Are you going to show up? No, my forum animation is broken. We have a forum where you can ask questions and usually get an answer, almost always. So, yeah. And, Amina has a really good question. What is the difference between utter_name and utter_ask_name?
So typically the ask is the format for when a form will be asking for a particular slot. So it's...
So I'm just going to try and pull up. There's the forum. That's the forum link down there. I have discovered why it wasn't showing up. It's because I was using an animation from the wrong scene. I know that the utter underscore is syntactic. Is the utter ask syntactic as well?
I think so. Yeah. I think you just passed it.
There we go. Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the syntax for something that's happening in a form, which sounds like you are using Amina, would be utter ask form name slot name or utter ask slot name. And if you're using multiple forms, I would definitely recommend including the form name for being explicit instead of implicit. All right. Comps. Kay asks, I'm so sorry, I know I'm saying it wrong. I'll try that, thanks, about the fine tuning. What I did was reducing the epochs in the config, but after some threshold, it really messed up the entity recognition. Okay, so you were underfitting. Is there a potential bottleneck in the GPU or CPU? I mean, maybe. I mean, that's going to be very hardware dependent. I don't know, have you run into any specific sort of general hardware bottlenecks, Chris?
Just when you like hit out of memory, but not anything that particularly slows it down. But if you're not training with a GPU, that's definitely one way to speed things up.
Mm-hmm.
if you have access to that. So typically I've seen that increase model training time by about 5x. Unempirical evidence there.
I mean, it's empirical. You just haven't, written it down
Yeah.
and looked at it. The other thing that might be an issue is that actually Felicia is going to come in tomorrow for an office hour specifically about this. So the TensorFlow 2.6 update, if you're using, was it 8.8? 2.8.8 of Rasa, we've switched to TensorFlow 2.6. Anecdotally, it is slowing down training time some. But I will kick questions about that to tomorrow, which is going to be all about that update and sort of like why we did it and more details there. Also, we have a blog post that I can dig up somewhere.
One more thing too, if you're using like a pre-trained embedding model, that's another thing that can just increase training time dramatically. So you could just look at using sparse featureizers instead, and that can a lot of times not impact your accuracy too much, and you can keep the epochs higher for your entity classifier and still get good accuracy.
Absolutely. You can also pre-train your own embedding model if you have like a lot of data. He asks, what is more relevant for, I'm guessing that's for this training time. Like, it depends. I know that that's a very frustrating answer, but there's a lot of things that can cause slow training time. I think the fine tuning might be your quickest bet, especially if you're just adding conversations. All right, Amina has another question. While using categorical slots, I got this error. Set slot type categorical, which is never used during training. It can throw off the prediction. Make sure to include training examples in your stories for the different types of slots this action can return. Do you have any idea how to fix it? It is a warning. Yeah, do you want to talk about this, Chris?
Yeah, the first thing I would think is potentially in your stories, if you're not providing any record of like that slot being set inside the story, that would be what you need to include for that categorical slot. And if you are and it's still throwing that, I would look at are you just providing the name of the slot and not a potential value? Because since it's categorical, it's branching based off of the value and not just if that slot was set or not.
I'm gonna try and pull up the documentation that is relevant. So because the assistant's behavior will depend on the slot value, it needs to see examples for each of them. Basically, is the not great summary of what Chris just said. I don't know that I needed to say that. Maybe that's helpful. Maybe that's not. I think Chris gave a really good explanation. It's a warning. I mean, you might get unexpected behavior if you don't provide a lot of examples. And that's what we were talking about with the branching, right? So if the slot's going to change the conversation dramatically more than just the utterance that said, the branching is having an example for each of those slots and the way it's going to change stuff. All right. And we don't have any outstanding questions right now. So I'm going to ask you the question that I had in my back pocket that I think I've asked you before, but I think you might have a new answer based on what you mentioned earlier. Do you have a favorite chatbot? Or one you really like. It doesn't have to be your all-time favorite. I know that sometimes can be a little bit
I think if I said this last time, I used to really like that old messenger bot that was like the hipster cat giving the weather. That's probably still my favorite because I just feel like they did such a good job at writing in a personality. But I would say I don't know. I think that's probably still my favorite just because, I don't know. I think it's fun, like when things like that can delight a user. So I will not change my answer.
Fair enough. And I think, there's a lot of room for fun chatbots in the world. I think they can be very enjoyable toys. All right. Harris, sorry if I'm saying that wrong, says about out of scope intent. Because Rasa treats it as another intent, it really does not solve the robustness on unseen data. Wrong intent is incorrectly picked with high softmax. Okay, so it sounds like there's a situation where somebody is asking something out of scope to the assistant, and the assistant is misidentifying the intent, not as being in the out of scope intent, but as being in a different intent. Yeah. Do you want to speak on this first, Chris, or do you want me to say some random stuff?
Yeah, I think, I mean, just adding more data is like the obvious but easiest first step is just making sure you have plenty of data inside the out of scope intent, things that are representative too.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I
It's
was
just
thinking.
yeah. And then the second one is just looking at your fallback threshold.
Hmm.
How high do you have that? If it is scoring very high for another intent, I would look at potential data conflicts too between your out of scope and that intent that is returning. And like what I usually find is it could mean in that incorrectly predicted intent, like maybe you're just repeating a certain phrase over and over again, and it's like some pretty common words, and so because those pretty common words keep coming back, that intent is being triggered even though it's something that's out of scope. So I would just look at the integrity of that intent that is currently returning.
Yeah. And the only thing I would add to that is to sort of build on the representative thing. The out of scope intent is not everything that's potentially out of scope. It's things that are out of scope that people are going to say to your assistant, and ideally have said to your assistant. Because if I'm talking to like the hipster weather cat bot, I'm not going to be like, I need a recipe to serve for that contains bell peppers, right? Yes, that would be out of scope, but it's probably not a turn I'm actually going to initiate with that assistant. So from a robustness standpoint, you are trying to capture like within the it's not the population of everything somebody might say, it's a population of things people are going to say to your assistant that aren't covered in a current intent. So it's smaller than it seems, if that makes sense. Some more clarification. The fallback does not help at all because the confidence threshold still meets it, but with incorrect intent prediction. Ooh, if you're getting really high confidence and not super accurate results, you may be overfitting. I would add more data, would be my first thing that I would do there. It's a classic neural network problem, can be solved in many other ways, but using a framework has its own problems. I have a paper on robustness, but in Rasa, there's a problem on relying on the framework. I mean, no Rasa assistant is just the framework, right? It's always the framework and the data. And I would say in this instance, my first thing and hopefully last thing I'd have to do would be really to dig into the data a little bit more, and make sure that my out of scope intent is representative, like Chris mentioned, and also make sure that I have enough training data and enough representative training data for each of my other intents. Because this sounds like, especially given the high confidence, this sounds like it might be an overfitting issue. Yeah. Oh, hard to say without seeing everything, but that's my gut instinct. Did you have any other things to add about that before we go on to the next question?
Nope.
Okay. Amina has another question. Can we have two forms sharing the same entities? Based on a specific intent, the related form will be activated. So I will specify in the story if it's an intent A and then form A. Otherwise, is this possible?
So is everything about the form the same? It's just the way you trigger it is different?
Two forms sharing, sorry, some entities, not the same entities.
Oh, some.
Yeah. I think that's possible, but you're probably going to need to specify which entity goes in which slot. Otherwise, you might have issues with... This is something that the open source team has been thinking about quite a bit, and I think in the future it will be harder to put yourself into a weird situation with this, and that's all I'm going to say about that, but keep your eyes peeled.
Yeah, I was just going to add that it's definitely possible. And like I've built a bot before where a lot of different forms needed an email address, for example. So they were all kind of looking for that. I think the thing you need to look out for is if something like that gets filled in an earlier form, do you want that to stay around for when they ask about that next form? Because if you do, it's something like an email address, you don't need to ask for that again. By default, your bot will keep that slot around for that session. But if it's something like as simple as like a number, where the number that they're looking for will potentially change in the next form, then I would want to make sure that you run an action at the end of your first form that clears that slot, sets it back to none.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, so yes, definitely possible. We got a question from Sevla Kumar. Sorry if I'm saying that wrong. I saw this in the Rasa documentation about synonyms. NLU intent, check balance examples, what's my credit account balance, blah, blah. Does this mean if the user enters a credit card account, the slot will still be filled with the value credit? Sorry, I'm going to pull up the example for that because I think that'll be a little bit more helpful. Nope. Sorry. I'll pull up the browser so y'all can see me fail to spell. It's directly in front of me. Can I do it? Let's find out. SYNON. All right, so the example here about synonyms, if the user enters credit card account, will the slot still be filled with the value credit? Yes. Oh, that answered your question. Yes. And Harris says, thanks. You're very welcome. Okay, another one from Kay. Sometimes users write complete gibberish like ASGH, blah, blah, blah. In those cases, I do not want the chatbot to react with an utterance. For this case, I use a response selector to train this case as a subset of chit-chat intent, chit-chat babbling. I then just don't define any chatbot responses. However, Rasa is spamming me with warnings. Your training data contains an example for the chit-chat babbling intent. You need to either add a response phrase or correct the intent. It's working fine, though. Is there a better way? Sorry for the big ones. Oh, no, we're happy to have the big ones. Does it need to be in a response selector?
Yeah, I would think no, because one of the big reasons why you include it in the response selector is so you are just building a single story or rule for where the response will come back. So if you don't need a response for it, I would say potentially look at just moving it out.
Yeah, I would move it into like a top level intent and then just write a rule. So whenever somebody triggers the babble intent, you just, action listen. You don't say anything. Yeah. I think that's why you're getting the warnings, because the response selector is expecting a response. I'm glad it's working, though. Sylvia Kumar says, thank you. You're very welcome. All right, next question. How can we try different configs and choose the best, like comparing BERT and Camembert? Do you do any sort of grid search on the hyperparameters? There is a project provided by Rasa, but it's on the old version with Markdown. I mentioned it in the forum, no follow-up, but I wanted to have your advice. Let me see if I can find the project you're talking about.
Yeah, it's HyperOpt. It's I think if you're just like comparing embeddings, I would just use the Rasa test command that lets you pass in multiple configs rather than using this project. Because this one's a lot more about like finding the optimal hyperparameters. And I think it can help here, but for that specific use case, I would think it's more than you need. Yeah. So if in the Rasa, I think it's in test, you can pass in multiple config files, and then it'll test it with your data and then show you the comparison of the different configs.
Yes. Let's pull that up.
I think it's in, yeah, preparing for production on the left, and the nav towards the top.
Oh, there it is.
And that one. And then testing your assistant.
Thank you. I always just use the search because I can never remember where anything is. Yeah.
And then comparing NLU pipelines. Yeah, it's on the right.
Oh. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, so if you're just switching out pipelines. Yeah, I would say unless your assistant is like big, I know I keep talking about this, but I tend to work with, folks who generally are working on slightly smaller assistants than sort of enterprise scale, because I don't support Rasa Enterprise much day to day. I would say in like 90% of cases, 90+% of cases, you're going to get a much bigger boost from adding more training data than you will from certainly from doing hyperparameter optimization. That sort of like grid search is, it's going to cost a lot, it's going to take a long time, and you may not actually see any benefit. And there's actually a paper, I don't know that it's been accepted a peer review journal, but it came out, folks are talking about it on Twitter, showing that adding additional training data can replace, billions of hyperparameters in terms of performance boost, particularly for the sort of, closed-ended questions like intent classification and conversation prediction. So more data, I would say, is my general advice if you're looking for performance improvements.
And just to add, I think that's the number one answer too for enterprise clients too. So even if you have a very big assistant, it's first thing you do is look at your data, where are the conflicts, like where can you add data and so on before you look at comparing pipelines.
Yeah, which I mean, I know it's not the glamorous machine learning work that everyone signed up for, but unfortunately that is the actual machine learning work. I think like Andrew Ng has like a big kick that he's going on right now about data. I forget what he called it, but basically it's like, hey, data engineering will get you really big benefits for your machine learning system, so you should do that. I think he's calling it data-centric AI. He's written a bunch of blog posts about it. Yeah, so very similar to what we recommend. Yeah. And K, comps for gobble? I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong. So talking about why the sort of the babbling intent was underneath chit chat. I thought it was smart because the NLU data might be similar to chit chat. I see the point there, but that's because that class is so unique, right? You're not going to see, even just like on a character level, you're not going to see those combinations of characters in a real turn, because key smash is very, even just like the entropy is going to be very different from actual language. I think you're safe to like add that in as its own intent, and it should be pretty identifiable because it's going to be pretty distinct from the rest of, I don't know. I hope that made sense. It's not going to be similar to pretty much any other intent unless you have like separate blah, blah, blah and key smash intents. Amina says, do we need to use custom actions in a project? I know it's used to connect to a database or to do some validation. Is there any other way to use custom actions?
No, you don't have to. I mean, if you can avoid it, in my own mind, the more logic you can add into stories and rules, the easier it'll be for like other people to pick it up. And it's in general like a better idea, because I've seen a lot of people go down the path of writing custom actions for like dialogue logic. And it's definitely
Mhm.
possible, but it gets a lot more complicated and it gets tricky very quickly. So if you can avoid it, then you don't need it, then that's great. I will say at the same time, sometimes things are just like easier in code. So you could potentially save yourself a lot of time too if you have something you're trying to do and like dialogue logic wise and you want to throw it in there.
Yeah. Yeah, you can do anything in a custom action if you can do things with, Rasa that Rasa does. Probably going to be easier because we've already written that code and we maintain it and you don't have to, unless you're an open source contributor, in which case, thank you. Um, I would say one thing to watch out for with custom actions is that it can be really easy to end up over engineering something and doing, like Chris mentioned, like stuff that Rasa already does in a custom action, or doing like a lot of stuff with custom actions that's just not necessary and maybe not the best use of your time, and then you have to maintain it and it's a big pain in the butt. So yeah. Avi says, do you have a tutorial link for connecting Rasa to a database for retrieving and storing? So you're probably going to want to do that. It depends on what you're retrieving or storing. If it is for conversations, then that's one thing. Like if it's for like things that people have done with the assistant, that's one thing. If it is for people to interact with the database through the course of a conversation, that's a separate thing. So for the second one, you do it with a custom action, and I'm going to see if I can find a good tutorial real quick and share it with you. For the first one, that is stored in the tracker store. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, Chris?
Yes. So the tracker store is basically the piece of the open source architecture that stores like all of the incoming events. So anything that happens inside of Rasa, like the bot says something, you set a slot, all of this is saved as an event. And the tracker store is where Rasa stores all of that. So if you're not pushing the data anywhere else, you could, in theory, just use a tracker store for all those conversations and pull that out yourself.
And I'm going to share a link to, it's a little bit older. I believe it is not for Rasa 2.0, but a GitHub repo that has some example code. But I think the actions will still be more or less the same for using Rasa with a knowledge base. That might be helpful to help you get started.
There's also in the retail demo, Rachel, there's an example of just like
Yeah.
a SQLite integration.
That would also be helpful.
So I can send you
Oh, yes, please.
this in the chat.
I'll add that as well. Yeah. And it's also, I definitely know that this is something that folks would like more tutorial content about, and it is on my mind. Although I think y'all may have heard that we've got a major version update coming, so that is more on my mind right now. Yes, keep your eyes peeled. There should be some exciting stuff, and I think we'll all be very happy with the changes. SQLite demo. Here we go. All right. Question from Shadal. Oh, thank you, Benson. She's got something to say. I have developed a chatbot. I want to take it live with Microsoft Teams in the company, but the information security team does not allow using ngrok. What can I do about it? We don't recommend ngrok for like pushing stuff live that people are going to use. It's more for like testing and like early stages of sharing. It also sounds like you're going to have some like specific security things to think about within your company. So I would host it in, a server, maybe an on-prem server if there's security issues. I don't know. What would you do in this case, Chris?
Yep, same. Just set it up on a server, and you can. I forget exactly how you set up Teams, but if for example you're just looking for like the Rasa URL that you need to give into there for the endpoint to hit, I think you could just use like our Rasa channel, and that'll provide a URL for you once you set that up on the server. So
yeah, good luck with your launch. I hope it's helpful for folks. All right. Mm. Comps for Guabble. I'm sorry, I'm just trying something different every time. I do not speak German. I have a form with multiple slots. Sometimes, for a specific response to slot A, slot B and C can also be inferred, but I'm unsure when to set slot B and C in my custom actions. Right now, I fill slot B and C in validate slot action in my action. So a real world example from slot device, Samsung Galaxy S10, we can infer OS name and maybe the OS version as slots as well.
Yeah, I would probably just include this logic in a form validation action, or overriding that. Just custom validation where you're pulling out that initial phone device type, and then you try to set what you can in the validate device type, and then return from there. Like maybe you can return another slot that sets OS. And if you can't infer that, then you just return that slot set to none so that it will then ask for the OS. So it's just something I notate on in custom validation.
Yeah, because you're going to need some sort of like lookup to an external data source, because I'm assuming you're not writing a separate action for every possible OS. Yeah, that's probably how I do it as well. Yeah. Ali says, awesome, thank you. You're very welcome. I hope it helps. Ethan says, are there plans to incorporate other backing NLP libraries like Spark NLP or Stanford Core NLP? I mean, I guess the weasel answer is that we're open source, so that if this is something that you would like, you are welcome to build it and make a pull request. I guess the less weasel answer is I don't know. I don't think so off the top of my head. But again, we're also all pretty like little peek behind the curtain. We're all pretty noses down right now, working on the major version update. So yeah. Yeah. And Kay says, okay, perfect. Great. Yeah. I think that's also a really clever use of a validation action, because it means that people will spend less time entering information in, which I like. Yeah. Waiting for other questions. One sec. There's a chat I haven't checked in a while. Oh, we do have another question. Uh, Zed Leplin says, I have a question. Are there any reinforcement algorithms used in chatbots? Sorry if it's a stupid question. I'm a newbie. Not a stupid question at all. I would be very careful about reinforcement learning with chatbots. So, and feel free to jump in whenever you like, Chris, but there was, I want to say it was like 2016, 2017, when Facebook research had this pair of chatbots, and they were doing negotiation, and they were using reinforcement learning to do that. And what happened was the language that they were using quickly became unlike human language. There were a bunch of like really sensational headlines about like chatbots invent their own language, that sort of thing. You might have seen some of this stuff. And the outcome of that and sort of further research in the community is that reinforcement learning between two agents, when neither of the agents is a human, results in unhuman-like conversations and unhuman-like speech, like language production patterns, which if a human is using your assistant is going to be an issue. And at that point, like, why are you using languages interface anyway, right? Like, you can use, if you have just like two systems that are talking to each other in an automated way, like, I wouldn't use human language, I would use computer language, because it's going to be less difficult. It's going to be easier, basically. So, yes, there's been a lot of work on reinforcement learning and chatbots. I don't know off the top of my head of any like commercial systems that have successfully used reinforcement learning. I don't know if you do off the top of your head, Chris. Yeah, I would be very, very cautious.
Yeah, same. Nothing to add.
Um, Not a stupid question at all. Again, it was a big research topic. A lot of people worked on it. And this was like around-ish when the AlphaGo stuff was happening, and everyone was like, reinforcement learning is the way. And it's the way for some things. It's a very useful paradigm, but not for conversation modeling. Oh no, I missed a couple of Amina's questions. Let me scroll up. Thank you. I did. Thank you, thank you. Can we specify an entity value in a form?
Right. You mean like set a specific value from the form, or?
I'm not entirely sure. I'm gonna wait for Mina to clarify on that. If you're asking, can I say that I want a slot to be filled in a form from a specific entity? Yes. I think that it's what, from entity, I think? You know what I'm talking about? Oh, I think this is in the SDK, isn't it?
Yeah, I would pull up under concepts on the left. I would just go to actions, forms, and then slot mappings.
There we go. Yeah, so from entity. So you can definitely specify that you want something to be filled from an entity. If that's what you were asking, then the answer is yes.
If it's a specific value to fill there, then I would look at basically how your entity is getting normalized with the synonym values that you're using, as well as making sure you're making use of a categorical slot to match to whatever specific values you're looking for.
I think there was also another question that I did miss. I'm so sorry. Thank you for helping me out there. Question 7. While writing test stories, do we put what already exists in the NLU, or do we add something that the assistant should understand? This is a great question. I would use novel data, personally. And what I mean by that is, let me pull up test stories. I don't know if you have other experiences you want to share here, Chris?
By novel, you mean new data that the bot doesn't see?
This is the wrong thing.
Yeah, I guess I don't care as much either way, because usually when I'm running Rasa test, or for the test stories specifically, I'm mostly interested in the dialogue working versus when I'm checking my NLU model, I'm more likely to like run cross validation or run through like a test set that way. So, but I could totally see that. Yeah, the argument for just make sure it's new and you're testing your NLU model at the same time. So that makes total sense.
I think for me, the number one reason why I would do this is as a little bit of one last extra check-in about overfitting. Because like if I never show hello as an example in intent greet, which probably you would, I want to make sure that as I'm adding more and more data, I'm still able to capture this like specific one. I probably wouldn't use hello. I'd probably use something a little bit less common as a greeting, just to check in. And you could also do both. You could do some with existing data and some with new data. But yeah, it should never, if the turn is a turn that exists in your training data as an example for this intent, it should pretty much always be correctly identified, right? And if it's not, then something is wrong. And if it is very, very similar to your other training data, it should also be correctly identified. And if it's not, something is wrong. Hopefully that answers your question. You don't have to do it one way or the other, I guess is the bigger answer. It's up to you. Yeah. He says, thank you so much for your answers. It means a lot. You have no idea. I'm so glad Office Hours is back. I'm happy to be back. It's great to see you again, Amina. And I have so about the entity. I want to say for the specific entity in the first form, I wanted to be A. Oh, you want like the
slot value to fill.
Yeah.
As A. Yeah, so you can there's a value field on your slot mapping inside your form that as long as that entity is picked up, it'll fill it in as that particular value. It might be from only on from intent mapping. If you
That might
scroll
make
down.
sense. Your form from text, from intent. There you go, the
Yeah.
value. Yeah. Uh, Great. Thanks, Chris. And I hope that helps. And a question from Saval, and this might be our last one. We're getting kind of close to the end. We might have time for a couple more. How does Rasa communicate with Microsoft Teams? Does it have a topology? The information security team always asks me about these. I feel you. Security folks, they just want to know. And I appreciate that about them.
I need to pull up the documentation. Yeah, so I think you're just setting this up with Microsoft Bot Framework, right? And then inside of Bot Framework, you're just forwarding along messages to a Rasa webhook. Yeah, so let's list it out there.
Yeah, so the Rasa has internal architecture, but it's just sort of passing information back and forth over HTTP or HTTPS, which might be something your security team would prefer based on your questions.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hope that answers your question. And we have just 5 minutes, and I know you're super busy these days, Chris, so I want to make sure that I am being respectful of your time. Is there anything you want to share with the community? Like anything that's come up recently that you like, or maybe like a tip or trick that you really like, or a common like misconception or problem you've seen folks running into? Anything in particular you want to share?
I don't know. I'm trying to think of what I was just working on earlier.
Mm.
No, I guess just as I've been like heads down building a bot more recently, and just that, kind of how you mentioned earlier, not everything has to be solved in like the most complicated way. Just and like something could be like, as an example, I was asking this follow-up question, and in this voice, someone interjected like yes in between. I could actually finish the question, and it threw off the bot. And rather than building like a story or rule to handle it, I just changed the response so that it didn't ask the question in the middle of the response. So hopefully you're changing behavior that way instead. So they'll wait until the end of the sentence. So it's just, not everything has to be solved in this like cool machine learning way. There's things you can do experience wise to make your lives much easier, and make it easier on the users too.
Yeah. And I think that's also something you wouldn't have seen if you weren't looking at the data and being like, oh, whoopsies.
Yeah, exactly. It's not something you would think of when you're crafting the response by any means.
We got a couple final quick questions. Okay, we'll go through these real quick. So one, Ethan wants to know, have you tried using weak supervision techniques, something like Snorkel, to generate large data sets? I often have trouble conceptualizing how this one might create data for NER. Advice. Tread very lightly. Yeah, I was talking about this with some folks earlier on the Rasa team, and it's pretty rare once you're getting ready to sort of like launch an assistant for lack of data to be the problem. Usually it's lack of annotations of existing data that's more an issue. I mean, it depends. Obviously, there's a bunch of different reasons why you might be building an assistant. I will say that it's something that the research team is looking into and considering. Generated text data, it has the potential to go real south real fast. Basically, it's just what I'll say about that. And then I mean says, why does he have he, him on his name? Those are his pronouns, which you picked up on. Comps for Gable says, final one. Every time I log in and open up my Rasa X page, I get the onboarding notifications on the bottom right. Is there any way to disable them?
I think they fixed that in a later version. of always showing up. Check the change log. But yeah, that LC used to annoy me every single time.
I don't remember the version off the top of my head. Update would be my answer to that, and see if that helps out. Oh, hi, Jan. Jan Daniel is joining in, but we are just about to wrap up, unfortunately. But it's good to see you. Ethan says, by data, I mean annotated labels, tongue sticking out face. Yeah, I mean, if you have a list of things you know are going to be potential entities, then you can put them in a table and look them up using regexes, and get a nice little speed up. Depending on the size of the table. Hopefully a nice little speed up. Yeah. So I think we're gonna have to wrap it up here. Question about whether we've created a live chat for Rasa with a handoff feature. Right now it's only available through third-party solutions. So we do have, I mean, we don't have people who do support, I guess, but you can do bot handoff. I mean, you can do handoff in Rasa. That's the end of the the thing I'm trying to say there. No, it's good to see you too, Dana. Thanks so much for joining today, Chris. Thank you everybody who asked questions. We will be back tomorrow with a special edition that's going to be half an hour earlier, so 8:30 Pacific time. And that's specifically about the TensorFlow 2.6 update and questions around that. And that'll be with Felicia, who's a machine learning researcher. And then on Friday at 1 p.m. Pacific, so later in the day, I'm going to be doing a sort of like, I don't know, informal talk about evaluation, machine learning evaluation in Rasa. And we'll go through some of the features that I don't know, I was talking with some people recently who work on the Rasa team, and like, oh, I didn't know that was in Rasa. And I was like, I'll do a live stream about it. We'll talk about all these cool evaluation features we have built in for you. Great. So thanks so much for joining today, Daniel. Chris, sorry. I can't look at words and say other words. Thanks so much for joining today, Chris. Thanks so much for joining today, everybody, and your great questions. And we will be back tomorrow, Friday, and then next Wednesday for more office hours.